What we're doing is to create the conditions, ecological and sociological, for the return of these two large predators that are present. They have been on and off coming back, but we need to find the conditions for them to settle and to grow.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World with me, Ben Goldsmith. And today I'm very lucky to be talking to my friend Pedro Prata, who is leading efforts by Rewilding Portugal to restore natural vibrancy to great swathes of that country. And Pedro has big ambitions. Pedro, where did you spend your childhood, and how much time did you spend as a childhood immersing yourself in nature, looking for wildlife and so on?
So I grew up in the central mountains of Portugal, the Serra da Estrela Mountains. The closest and biggest town is Guarda, but I lived off from the city in a small family farm, and I was always surrounded and immersed in nature. I love the outdoors. I love biking and hiking and kayaking and fishing and so on. So all my free time as a kid, besides school, I would spend outdoors doing something. And I had a great passion for birds, fish, mammals, everything. I would track and I would find their nests and I would find them in the wild and just observe them. It was a great pleasure while growing up. So the seed was there, and that's what led me to biology to study. I only left the Central Mountain region for that, to go to Lisbon to be trained as a biologist when I was 18. So I grew up immersed in nature.
I don't know Portugal well. I visited the coast as a child, staying with a friend of mine whose parents had an apartment in Sintra. And more recently, I came to visit you in the northern part of Portugal, along the Douro. One impression I got is that a lot of the landscape seems to have been converted into commercial tree plantations, non-native species, eucalyptus, it seems to me radiata pine and so on. And I was quite staggered for a small country by the scale of that landscape transformation that's taken place. Is that true of the whole of Portugal? And what's your opinion of that? When did that happen? How?
Yeah, it's true. If you first visit Portugal, you travel from Porto to Lisbon, and it's like this 3-hour long drive, and you basically drive alongside the eucalyptus plantation all the way. It's staggering. It's shocking, honestly. But I do see the history, how we came to be like this, and it all has to be with political decisions. So back 150 years ago, the Portuguese state had a policy to develop the forestry sector by using eucalyptus. And it started like that. And of course, all the Atlantic front, which is more rainy, where there's better conditions, it all got transformed from former pastoral lands and small holding farming into big expansions of eucalyptus plantation. Not the whole country is like that. Portugal is quite diverse in climate and biomes. This north-western front is dedicated and mostly covered by eucalyptus. But you think about the south, you still have large expanses of montado, which is the cork and oak open woodland that is still used as pastoral land. And then the backcountry, so this area that we're in, this stretch of land along the border with Spain, is much more dry. And therefore, the condition for tree plantations is not so good, neither for eucalyptus, neither for pine. But until the late 70s, early 80s, pine was the dominant plantation that covered most of the forest area of the country. And because of the use of pine mostly for construction, that at the time, with new techniques of construction and so on, it lost its value as a resource for that. So when that happened, there was a big transformation in the plantations, and eucalyptus actually got the upper hand and now is the dominant tree cover in Portugal, which means that a lot of the country is now a degraded landscape of monospecific exotic plantation of eucalyptus.
And of course, eucalyptus, which comes from Australia, it's not native. It's incredibly effective at sucking water out of the land, and also creates conditions in which other plants cannot thrive. So it's a really dominant invasive and creates a dried out, denuded landscape. And after 2 or 3 crops of eucalyptus, I understand it's very difficult for the ecosystem to recover. eucalyptus also creates an extraordinary fire risk. A lot of us were horrified to read the stories last summer and the previous summer of the fires that swept Portugal and the people burned alive in their cars as they drove through eucalyptus plantations and pine plantations, which make those fires so much more intense. But is the eucalyptus profitable? Is there an economic impetus to continue with that kind of eucalyptus production? Or is there an opportunity now to change the economic model? As we may discuss later with sheep farming in the British uplands, which is hopelessly uneconomic, and therefore the farmers in those landscapes are now being incentivized to switch to the kind of farming which brings about the restoration of nature. Could a similar economic transition take place in the eucalyptus lands of northern Portugal?
Yeah, as you say, it's only profitable if you don't account for the externalities of the business. So eucalyptus, as you say, is a big risk. If these plantations pose to society as a whole a huge risk. It's not just about the degradation of soil, sucking up of the water, but actually the risk of fire. It's immense, and this is not accounted in the business. In the business model, it's not accounted to cover for those risks as for the society. So they're not contributing as an industry to society. We're actually paying for the risk of having huge swaths of land covered by these plantations that, in case of fire, as it happened in 2017, when more than 100 people died in forest fires because of the conditions that were now becoming more and more frequent due to climate change, drier, longer periods of summer with strong winds and low humidity, just create perfect conditions for fire to thrive. If this is burning in oil-rich species such as eucalyptus, it's like it's horrible. And that's what happened in 2017. It was unstoppable, uncontrollable. It lasted for weeks in a row, and it went through a huge expanse of land, crossing towns, crossing highways, crossing dams. It crossed dams. So imagine how strong a fire must be to cross a dam. And this is not accounted in the business model. So none of the industry have paid for those risks and those consequences. So if you think about that, the margin of profit for the industry is actually very small to the producers. So the people who are actually producing eucalyptus to feed the industry are gaining very little. They have this short cycle of production. Every 10 years there's a cut, and after 3 cuts, so after 30 years, the whole plantation ground has to be renewed. So they have to till it up to 1 meter deep, so completely destroying the soil structure to allow for new plantations, and each plantation is then less productive. So it's a short-term thinking without accounting for the risk that is making this business thrive. But there is the pulp industry production that needs the raw material to keep going, and that's the main drive. So if you look at it from an economic perspective, it doesn't make sense on the long term, only on the short term. If you're a small holder, if you want to make some bucks, of course, eucalyptus is the easiest. But on the long term, you're destroying the soil, you're putting your society to risk, and in the long term, not even the industry is going to gain from that. And that's one of actually the challenges for the pulp industry in Portugal, is to think about what are they going to do in 30, 40, 50 years, considering that the raw material will be less productive, considering that importation will be more expensive, and considering that climate change is going to affect the production chain, and therefore the conditions for having the cheap raw material that fed this industry for a long time is no longer available. So all considered, I would say that this needs to change, not just from an ecological point of view, but also from an economic point of view. But there needs to have a political decision towards that. And it seems like Portugal politician sector has been for decades or centuries now hostage to the industry. It feels like there's a state within the state with the pulp industry and the eucalyptus production chain in the country. No one wants to question this or dares to change it at this moment. And every single voice out there, such as me, who is always pointing out to these aspects of how dangerous and how blind it is to follow this kind of trajectory, we always feel like the outsider here talking about rubbish, because everybody knows that this is a very important economic factor for the country, which is not, but everybody is supporting it.
Pedro, you're spending most of your time focused on a particular mega landscape, which is the Greater Coa Valley on the border with Spain. It's on my bucket list, a place I really long to come and spend time and to explore with you. Can you tell us a little bit about that biome and what's happening there? What kind of restoration you're doing there?
Yeah, the Greater Coa Valley is quite interesting. It's this stretch of land that runs along the Spanish border between Portugal and Spain, on the Portuguese side, of course. And it stretches from the central mountain range. So there's to the south this mountain, the Malcata, where the river Coa starts. And it runs north all the way up to the Douro river. So the Greater Coa Valley, as we define it, is the catchment area for the Coa River and its tributaries. It covers 318,000 hectares, and within its core, basically where the river runs and most of its tributaries, it has a high level of abandonment of the land and passive rewilding of that land that has become a wildlife corridor. So what we're doing here is to reinforce this corridor to make it thrive. So diminishing the obstacles and allowing it to be more abundant in wildlife. And we're doing that by several means. And what we envision here is to have this large landscape that actually connect multiple important nature areas, both to the south, north, east and west, that allow for processes, wildlife and species to come back and thrive in the long run. So we have like a project at hand now with a medium-term vision, about 10 to 15-year vision, where we know what we're going to do, where the threats are, where we need to act, but we have like a wish for a desire of a vision towards a longer term, a century-long vision for this landscape. And that's what we're working on.
And what's the scale of this? Can you give me a sense of the scale of the area that you're working in directly, and also the scale of the connectivity that you envisage?
Yeah. So as I said, the Coa Valley is 318,000 hectares big as a catchment of the river. Its core, where most of the rewilding is happening, is a core area that runs along the river in tributaries. Is 120,000 hectares long, big corridor. It stretches for about 150 kilometers north to south and has a width of about 25 to 30 kilometers within the core area. So it's quite big. What we aim for the connectivity is to allow the species that use these corridors to move from a natural area to natural area, actually to connect multiple of these natural areas within the corridor. And this includes a lot of the land mammals such as the wolf, the lynx that was present and hadn't come back, but is sometimes dispersing and coming through here. Of course, the return of the inhabitants of the forest, such as deer, roe deer, ibex one day, and the ones that we can bring back because they have been absent for millennia, such as the wild horse and the replacement for the auroch, what we're using now, the taurus. So we're using those in specific islands along this corridor. So our strategy is to buy small patches of land along this corridor to create a stepping stone approach where we have this string of smaller areas where we're now introducing the animals in order for the medium term allow them to spill off from these areas and actually use the corridor as a whole. We're now managing and acting on 4 of these small areas that all combined are a little bit more than 2,000 hectares, almost 3,000 at the moment, and we aim to have another 2 or 3 in a string where we can act. But the idea is that these are seeding. This is we're stepping in, putting the processes to run, and then let them spill out and actually use the corridor as they should be using this corridor, because what it feels like natural for this landscape, and that's what we're trying to improve.
And in the process of reintroducing animals, do you have to engineer the land in any way? For example, removing fences, removing non-native plant species such as eucalyptus, renaturalizing watercourses. How much physical work do you need to do in these places before you get on with species reintroduction?
Yeah, so whenever we buy a piece of land, and usually we have to combine several different pieces together to form a significant piece that we can work in, and we can introduce like horses, taurus, other species. The first thing we do is defencing. Honestly, there's so much fencing going on everywhere. These are lost fences, abandoned fences, obsolete fences that were used for some time, but that's too hard to take them out. So people just leave them. So a lot of it has to do with defencing in the first approach. Then sometimes there's encroachment because the land hasn't been grazed at all by any herbivore for a long time. So there's encroachment, and we need to break that encroachment a little bit before we introduce the large grazers. Then we'll leave that job to them.
But by encroachment, what you mean is encroachment by native species that are naturally recolonizing the land.
Yes. So, it's of course native species, but it's mostly dominated by broom, the several species of broom, which are fire pioneers. So you have to look at this landscape as a result of decades of very frequent fires. And what happens after a fire is that the pioneer species get a hold and get the upper hand, and they are the first to colonize. Usually broom species, which are more dominant here, after 3, 4, 5 years after a fire, completely cover the ground. They're very thick, and of course, it's just a stepping in succession, but that would allow for trees to grow under the broom and then actually take the upper hand above the broom. But what happened is that the frequency of fire doesn't allow it. So if you have a frequency that is below 10 years, every 10 years there's a fire, every 5 years there's a fire. There's even a case where we bought the land where the average frequency of fire was calculated in the last 20 years to be 2.7 years. So every 3 years there was a fire, which means that after a long run of this frequency, what we have is the dominance of just broom. Basically, the seed bank for trees is depleted. Every other species that doesn't do well after fire is gone. Or species that take longer to grow and to thrive didn't have the chance. So that means that it's all covered by broom. So what we do is break that. So open clearances, open areas where the grasses can start to cover it, to allow for the succession to take place, and actually to create this discontinuity, this mosaic within the landscape that then is kept by the large grazers. It's just a kickstart action that we do to allow for the grazers to be more effective right from the beginning. That's one thing. Then you talk about water. That's a second thing. A lot of the land is now drained. We're missing the beaver as an engineer for that storing of water in the landscape, and a lot of the natural springs, natural ponds, temporary ponds were transformed for some reason, usually to have watering holes for livestock. So these watering holes are completely destroyed in terms of ecological benefits they could bring. So restoring some of these water points allow them to have this seasonality of being dry part of the year during summer and then filling up during the rainy season. This variety of niches at ecological is quite important. So restoring water sources is also part of our work, and these are the main actions that we do kickstarting. So defencing, breaking the dominance of broom, and restoring water points. That's mainly what we do. Then get the grazers in place and let them lead that transformation. And that's what we've been doing every time we buy a piece of land. We're now stepping stone, doing one after the other to have these multiple areas within the corridor that later on we will try to open up the last remaining fences for them to spill over.
I read recently an article in the Portuguese press suggesting that beavers may be recolonizing the Douro catchment. They of course, were released onto the Ebro 20 years ago and have made their way to the upper reaches of the Ebro, which is not far from the upper reaches of the Douro in northern Spain. How long do you think it is until the beavers make it back into your landscape? Because obviously that will be a vital missing part of the ecosystem back in place.
Yeah, it's. I think we'll be surprised. Honestly, we'll be surprised how fast they will arrive to the Coa Valley. So what happened was that there was the population in the Ebro 20 years ago, as you said, and recently, as last year, there was findings that they actually crossed to the Douro catchment. So they basically climbed the ridge between the two catchments and colonized the upper Douro region in Spain. Then a few months later from that news, there was a second news where there was findings of the beaver lower downstream from the Douro, actually not too far from the border with Portugal. So where the Douro runs from Spain into Portugal, there's a few tributaries, and one of which there's evidence of beavers, and this is very close. We're talking about a few hundred meters from the border. There is other evidence, because the monitoring followed on, that there are other pocket populations in the same region, either on the Portuguese or the Spanish side. So we don't have yet the proof, but there's evidence that there might be very close by. And this is a few dozen kilometers away if you follow the river downstream to the Coa. So that means that on a natural expansion rate, we'll be looking to have the beaver back into the Coa catchment in 5-10 years, let's say. We might be surprised to be faster.
Theoretically, if those beavers were not present in your part of the Iberian Peninsula, do you think it would be possible to persuade the Portuguese government to give you a license to reintroduce beavers, or would the bureaucracy and the entrenchment of special vested interests be too much? This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com.
Well, we've been trying to persuade government and, of course, the authority, the institution that is responsible for these processes to reintroduce not just beaver, but other species. And the resistance has been, at this point, impossible to surpass. But I think there will be a change in attitude, because we've been showing proof that we're capable of leading large restoration efforts. We have been reintroducing domestic species and allow them to be wild. We're actually pressing to actually change the status of these animals towards a wild species. And in the future, as the evidence mounts that we need to take action to allow for biodiversity to thrive, and some species such as the beaver are such a clear missing link in this ecosystem restoration, that our pressure, our time, and the condition will at some point be possible to have a license to at least bring back the beaver.
Pedro, I saw some amazing videos, not just the ones you sent me, but on social media all over the place, of the release of some tauros, which are, of course, the kind of modern-day equivalent of the ancient wild cattle, the aurochs, and also some, I think, Soraya horses. How many, and what's the plan? When did you release each of these species? How many of them, and what next?
So we've been releasing different herds. We started with the Soraya horse, which is an old Portuguese breed of a related horse to what was the wild horse. Actually, the Soraya was caught as a feral species back in the century ago, and was created as a domestic breed, but basically has a lot of traits of what was a wild horse. And we bought a few herds. 2 years ago, we released the first herd, and now every year, by the end of April, we've been releasing new herds. It coincidentally happens to be end of April, 1st of May. Usually we release herds. So we have at the moment, so there was 2 years of release of Soraya horses. And then last year or this year, we released the taurus for the first time. So we're looking for every year to release new herds, increasing their numbers, creating new herds, allowing them to grow. At the moment, we have 17 Taurus. We brought 15 and 2 were born here. And we have about 25 or 26. It depends because they keep growing, the herd. The new foals are born now recently. So there are about 25, 26 Soraya horses and in 3-4 different herds, and we keep increasing them. So the idea is to create the conditions for these herds to grow and to actually become more wild, to display more wild behaviors and wild traits. We're having now in contained areas, so basically they're all within large fenced areas, but we've seen very interesting behaviors besides that, and they do have a moving pattern that is very wild. They don't stop. They just keep exploring their landscape. They actually found a way out of the fence and they moved out. They crossed the river and they just moved out and start to explore. And it was interesting to see that they weren't noticed because they really act as wild animals. They are cryptic. They don't run into trouble. They're doing their business, but they want to explore. They never stop. So, like as displaying that behavior of the fear ecology that is in the textbook. So, even though there's the presence of wolf here, is not a significant presence, but the Taurus have displayed that behavior of defense, of not stopping, short-term feeding and drinking and moving on.
In Spain, there's been some brilliant work by Fernando Moran and others to show the increased fire resilience of landscapes which have bison present. And I think it's so important that the Portuguese government begins to understand how these large herbivores not only breathe life back into landscapes by creating these dynamic mosaic ecosystems, but which create landscapes also which are more fire resistant. And that brings us to the subject of large carnivores. How optimistic are you that wolf numbers will recover in your part of Portugal? Of course, there were none until quite recently, but wolves are recovering in the northern part of the Iberian Peninsula. And also bears. I mean, the bear numbers are pretty exciting in the Cantabrian Mountains and further up to the east and the north in the Pyrenees. Can we expect to see a natural recolonization on your side of the Douro by bears and wolves?
Well, the wolf was never gone. Their numbers are very low. South of the Douro is this pocket population that is disconnected from the main population north of the Douro. They suffer from that lack of connectivity, not just because they don't get new animals, but also because their gene pool is quite contained. So the problem in genetics is important for this population, and of course they would benefit from having input from the remaining population north of the Douro. But besides that, the numbers nowadays are still quite low. I believe they will grow. Because we're looking to promote the conditions that will allow for it. So we've been working on the wolf population south of the Douro, trying to diminish the barriers, either ecological and sociological barriers for the connectivity of this population. And we have witnessing some improve, namely on prevention of damage from their attacks, and we're looking to improve even more the conditions for their prey bases, so the habitat conditions for having larger packs and packs that actually breed. So this is the strategy that we're following, but it's a long-term strategy. You can't see results straight away. It takes time, especially with these carnivores. As for the other top predators, the lynx has been dispersing. So it has been released mostly in the south of the peninsula. But naturally, it has been dispersing northwards. Also because the conditions as climate change changes, the habitats in the south are becoming more favorable in the north. Actually, the koa was the last remnant wild population of lynx before it got extinct back in the 90s. So what we're doing now, and we will be actively working quite a lot on that, is to create the conditions again ecological and sociological for the return of these two large predators that are present. They have been on and off coming back, but we need to find the conditions for them to settle and to grow. And that's what we're looking to do. As for the bear, it takes longer to expand. That's it. I'm positive that they will come back. I mean, again, the koa was bear hunting ground for the nobility up to the 16th century. So that means that there were population of bear in the region at least 500 years ago in this region. And as for the connectivity, if you think about an expansion southward from the Cantabrian Mountains, they already crossed the border at least a couple of times they were noticed to Portugal in the Montesinho area. But if you think about it, the connectivity from that area downwards, the immediate connectivity across the Douro is the Coa River. So it just takes time. It needs to be created some conditions in terms of ecology, but also on the sociology of acceptance of these large predators. But I'm sure it's a matter of time these predators come back to their natural grounds, which were the koa till very recently.
Large carnivores are probably more controversial than beavers or large herbivores, although you'd be surprised if you came to Britain how more or less anything more charismatic than a hedgehog can actually be quite surprisingly controversial. I'd love to know a little bit about the conflicts and the difficulties that you face in your area from a cultural perspective. You know, how do the local communities view your activities, and how do you get along with this work in that context?
Yeah, of course. Like predators, and especially the wolf in this region, has been, of course, polemic. But I would say that the main reason is not that people aren't used to have wolves, because wolves have always been present somehow and in certain numbers, and there were methods to deal with it. The main reason why I think nowadays there was a lot of controversy in the region about wolves is not about the impact that they have in livestock, but the way this is responded by authorities. So nowadays, the process to have compensation of an attack is so bureaucratic, it's so complex that most people don't do it. They rather uptake the loss than go through all that process and maybe get paid very late and very little for their lost livestock. And because of that, the direct persecution rose. So if people don't get their problem solved, they will solve them themselves. And that has created a lot of problem for the population of wolf to the south of the Douro, because there been the use of poison and direct persecution, even including the use of fire to drive the packs out of their ranges. So this creates a lot of disturbance that has been creating destructured packs that then later create more trouble because they need to find food, and they will obviously go for the easiest, and sometimes the easiest is just the sheep next door. And I think if we have a good proper program and solution for this kind of event, then the conflict will diminish to a minimum, and that is something that we've been pressing the state a lot about, because the solution is to compensate the people directly, face them, look them in the eyes, and find solutions together. We're doing that, but we're just a small NGO. If the state actually takes that responsibility, then the problem can be solved.
Pedro, how do local communities view your work more generally? You know, the idea of rewilding this landscape, creating corridors, and bringing back wildlife.
So nowadays, I would say that generally is very supportive. Of course, when you start working with wolf and large grazers, large predators, and talking about rewilding large landscapes, there is some resistance. But being present, working in the area, being from the region, staying here, having a vision, and actually deliver solutions, working with the communities, working with the economic fabric of the region, improving the knowledge about this region, and actually exporting the benefits of having such a beautiful wild landscape worldwide, have brought the attention and brought the people to come and visit, that brought some sense of pride to this community. So I would say that nowadays, basically 5 years later from start, the general opinion is quite positive, and we got a lot of support from the local communities because we work directly with them.
I feel very lucky to have spent that time talking to Pedro Prata about his extraordinary rewilding project in the Greater Valley, and I, for one, certainly plan on visiting as soon as I possibly can. Pedro tells me that the best access point is the city of Porto, and then a railway journey along the beautiful Douro River into the Coa Valley. And if you want to learn more about the project, visit rewilding-portugal.com. I hope you've enjoyed this third series of 6 Rewilding the World episodes. I've seriously enjoyed making them. These are some amazing people I've been lucky enough to talk to. If you have enjoyed it, I'd be really grateful if you'd leave us a review. If you'd like the series on whatever platform you use, spread the word among your friends. And if you've got projects or people that you think I should know about, people you think I should speak to on the podcast, I'd be very, very grateful for any ideas you might have. So please do submit them and we'll do our best to include them. The music for this podcast series was produced by Jamie Tuthill and also by my brilliant, talented young cousin Merle Powell-Smith, known as Marsa in music circles. Thank you both so much. I'm also incredibly grateful to the team at The Podcast Coach who've done everything to make this podcast happen. It's such a joy and a pleasure working with them. We'll be back with another series of Rewilding the World with me, Ben Goldsmith, early in the new year. So please do make sure that you're following us or subscribed so that you get notified when the first episode's out.
You already know that this isn't about one species. It's about systems, interdependence, collapse. And yet, wild salmon, one of the clearest indicators we have, are vanishing fast. Their decline signals something deeper, something more dangerous. I'm Jim Murray. I host The Last Salmon. It's not a side story. It's the biodiversity story that everyone like you should be listening to. Season 2's out now.
One of the best ways to support rewilding is to go and visit rewilding projects on the ground. My friends at the European Nature Trust have asked me to tell you about the series of coexistence adventures that they've put together. They're designed to give you the best chance of seeing Europe's most iconic species, bears, wolves, lynx, and so on. All of these are on the rise in Europe because of rewilding projects. These trips are hosted by expert guides and conservationists, and most importantly, the European Nature Trust is giving half of the revenues directly to the foundations working on the ground to restore wildlife. I'd love you to check out these coexistence adventures at the European Nature Trust website.